Have you ever wondered what actually makes a textbook sell, or why so many well-written ones never take off? Do you worry about how to balance writing about what you love with what instructors will actually adopt? Hey, co-authors. In this episode, we unpack why textbooks succeed not just on quality, but on market fit and usability. We discuss textbook writing as an intellectual, strategic, and even economic endeavor, where understanding your audience, the market, and adoption pathways are just as important as the content itself. Let's dive in. Whenever you're a student, be it K through 12 student, college student, or even beyond, you end up reading a whole bunch of textbooks for your classes. You have your intro to biology textbooks, your computer science textbooks, your communication studies textbooks, your theory textbooks, research methods textbooks, all these different things. And you don't really give a whole lot of thought to the quality or the process in which these textbooks have been created. You just think to yourself, like I'm in this class, Intro to Physical Science. My book says it's an Intro to Physical Science book. Don't know anything about the authors, don't know anything about the quality control of the book. It's the book that my professor chose. So I bought it and I'm here with it. But then one day you get done with your PhD or, whatever your terminal degree is, and you're like, I want to write a book and I want other professors to adopt it. I want other students to read it. How do I do that? And so what I wanted to talk about today was how do you create a commercial textbook? And I do want to differentiate a commercial textbook from different types of books that are out there. There is the commercial textbook, which is typically what undergraduate students use that their instructor picks out for them. Then you might have monographs. So those are scholarly books written by a professor about a specific topic or an idea. Those are usually pitched to other academics. Sometimes you'll have monographs that straddle that sort of popular academic divide. So think of writing pitched at the level of like the Atlantic or the New York Times, right? Something that's a little bit more sophisticated than your average person, but not a full-on academic treatise. So it could be for other academics, could be for that type of audience. Then you have edited collections, which again, typically are for other academics, and you are the editor in charge of however many other chapters are being solicited and produced by other authors. All of these have different ways of being created. All of them have different markets. All of them have different processes. I know that last week I said, I'm going to have a podcast episode on writing books. I feel like now I'm going to need to have 3 episodes on these 3 different types. So this time I'm going to talk about commercial textbooks. We'll tackle the other types in the future, so don't worry about that. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about how do you go from having an idea about a commercial textbook that you might have and get that into the hands of students who are going to buy it, use it, cite it, and maybe even cite that as the reason for them falling in love with the discipline of your study. Okay, so let's dive in. Are you interested in mastering scholarly writing, developing productivity, and increasing impact, all while staying healthy? Then welcome to the Publishing Academic Research Podcast. My name is Dr. Kyle Ruddick, and I'm a full professor and writing coach who's dedicated to making sure you break through whatever is stopping you from reaching your scholarly goals. I meet so many scholars who have creative, innovative, and daring ideas, but can never seem to get those projects from proposals to print. I want you to get your work in the hands of people who will read it and appreciate it. So let's get into this week's big idea. So before I begin, you might remember an episode that I did a long time ago about going to a conference and meeting one of the authors of a textbook that I really love. His name is M. Griffin. Shout out to Dr. Griffin. And he wrote, it's now co-authored, but at the time it was a sole-authored book called Communication Theory. And I loved that book. I was a total nerd about it. I would go to the cafeteria on campus in between classes and I would just sit there and read the textbook. So yeah, it's pretty obvious that I needed to be a professor, right? Like super nerd. But I will say that like textbooks have that type of power. Yes, the vast majority of students, they're going to be reading a textbook and they're going to be like, oh my God, they're expensive and they're boring and they're dull, but they don't have to be. They don't have to be any of those things. You have a lot of control over that as an author, which we can talk about. But you have a chance to shape the conversations of your field by talking about topics that are relevant to undergraduate students who will one day become master's and PhD students, and then maybe even one day a professor. So you have this chance of creating something that could change the trajectory of someone's life. So it's a really big responsibility and it's a really cool project to tackle. So how do you do that? Well, I have 6 different considerations that you should have whenever you're wanting to write a commercial text. So the first one, before you start anything else, is you just need to make sure that you have a good idea and that you can validate that with your peers and with your colleagues to make sure that it's a good idea, it's one that they would be interested in, or that aligns with the needs of your discipline. So I know that this might sound like a bit of a dirty word to a lot of academics, because we typically eschew business speak unless you're actually in a college of business. But a lot of the humanities folks, we don't like that. But you need to do market analysis, right? I mean, there's no other way to label this. As more and more stuff gets published, it is increasingly difficult to convince a publishing company to accept a proposal, which we'll get into on how to write a proposal, but to accept a proposal and to go through the work and the research and the marketing and everything to try to get your book out there. They are profit-seeking entities. That's what they're trying to do. And so it's really important for you to figure out, where do you fit in the conversation of your discipline? So considerations might be, are you targeting first, second, third, or fourth year students? Is it a class that's going to be theory heavy? Is it practice heavy? What books are already out there? Do you have a novel take on addressing whatever the topic is? So these are all considerations that you need to be thinking of. So if I have an idea, let's say for myself and my own discipline, if I wanted to write a course textbook that was an introduction to public speaking class, that's the first year student class that almost everyone takes across the United States that people in my discipline teach. As you can imagine, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of different books vying for this market, because every class is usually 25 to 35 students. So if you get a department to adopt that and they're running 4, 5, 6 sections of that class over the course of a year, now you've got 150 to 200 students every year that's adopting that textbook. Well, if I'm selling that textbook for $60 a pop, 200 students at $60 a pop is $12,000. Great. Your book just made gross $12,000 from one institution, right? And there are hundreds of institutions all across the United States. But as you can imagine, since there are dozens, if not hundreds of different public speaking textbooks out there, there's a lot of different ways that you can compete in that market space. Maybe you compete on price. Maybe you're not charging $60. Maybe you're charging $20. Maybe you have an approach to your writing that is different from others. Maybe everyone else is really stuffy and you have a very invitational or very step-by-step approach that's very open to students. Maybe you have some sort of newfangled technology that goes along with it, some course packet that goes along with it. Any of these can make your work more or less competitive as you are thinking about, what is it that I want to write about? But the first thing that you have to do before you do anything else, like I said, is you're just trying to figure out, does my idea have wheels? If I want to write a public speaking textbook, I need to know, what's the gap in the market? Who is this course for? What level are the students? What is it that I'm doing with this book that makes it novel? What problem with current textbooks might instructors have that my textbook solves? So you figured out, hey, I've got a pretty good idea. Seems like I've got a novel idea, even though the market is kind of saturated, like a public speaking book. Or maybe you're like, hey, this is a new cutting edge field. A lot of folks, that's all they do is they try to figure out what the trends are in their discipline, and then they try to plant their flag and be the first one wherever the winds are blowing. So as you can imagine, a whole bunch of people right now writing a whole lot of stuff on AI. Are they AI experts? Probably not. They've done enough research and, most importantly, enough market research to know that that's where a lot of demand is. And so they're going to write that book in the hope that other people adopt the book. So after you've got an idea, you validated it, it looks like it's good. Now it's time to go to the next step, which is you need to figure out which publishing company or companies are a good fit for your book. So there's a couple of different ways that you can look at this. First off, there are big name companies. You've got your McGraw-Hills, your Cengages, Elsevier, other types of big name publishing houses that are known for their market in undergraduate curriculum. That's almost all of what they do. So, for example, if you had a scholarly monograph, it would be unlikely that you would want to go to, say, McGraw-Hill with a book like that, because that's not really what they're in the business for. They're in the business of finding books that are going to appeal to the widest amount of people. So undergraduate textbooks, especially at the first and second year level, and pitched in that way. So that way they can make the most money off that textbook. So you're going to look at these publishing companies. There are things that you should be looking at whenever you are weighing the pros and cons of different places. You should think about what their reputation is. Again, some places like McGraw-Hill or Cengage, they have a reputation as being, I would say, not a rigorous scholarly outlet. that's not really what they're meant for, right? They're more profit driven than that. Whereas in my discipline, for example, I would say like there's a smaller publishing house called Waveland Press. It's nothing fancy. You look at the artwork on their textbooks, it looks a little bit dated, but man, those are solid books because they have a pretty rigorous process. And whenever a book comes out from them, you know that it's a pretty good intellectual contribution, even if it's pitched at the undergraduate level. So in terms of reputation, Waveland, I would say, is better than McGraw-Hill or Cengage. But second consideration might be marketing budget. McGraw-Hill and Cengage got oodles of money when it comes to marketing. They have teams of people for marketing. Waveland Press probably doesn't have quite as deep of pockets for that. So if you're really wanting someone who's going to like go out there and do your marketing for you, you go with those big name people. On the other hand, a place like Waveland Press, you would more likely take on some of those marketing responsibilities on yourself because they don't have quite the marketing budget that a McGraw-Hill or Cengage has. If you're willing to do that, cool. The book might be seen as a little bit more prestigious. On the other hand, now you're spending time doing marketing work. So it's a trade-off. You might also look at what their contracts look like in terms of what their royalties are. I would say that most publishers nowadays, unless you have a proven product on the market, so if you've written textbooks in the past and they've been successful, or you have some other big name thing that really kind of gives you some cachet, otherwise, most publishing houses are not going to offer you any upfront money. All of the money that you make is going to be on the back end on royalties, on sales. And based on the publishing house that you go with will depend on what type of compensation that you get. I would say it's pretty standard to go anywhere from 8 to 20% of the profits of the sales for your textbook. Certainly, you can find things that are more or less, but that's usually the ballpark. And so as you can imagine, again, unless you're dealing with first or second year student markets, writing textbooks is not a very lucrative business. So for example, I've written a book. It's really meant for students who are first year master's students or first year doctoral students. Well, that's an incredibly small market. And so I've probably sold 400 or 500 copies of the book. That's cool. But the royalties from that at the end of the day, few $100s. I'm not making any real money off that. That's okay because that wasn't the point to me. The point to me for that book was I wanted something that was addressing a gap in that level of instruction that other people weren't getting. The book, for those who might be curious, it's called Teaching from the Heart. I wrote it for students who were teaching for the first time as graduate teaching assistants or graduate student teachers. It was more important for me to address that gap than it was for me to write something for first or second year students. So whenever you're thinking then of your publishing houses, you're thinking about their prestige, you're thinking about their marketing ability, and you're thinking about what the royalties and contracts look like. And based on that, I would say it's time for you to start writing your prospectus. So the next step, writing your prospectus, whenever you go to publishing houses, most of them, especially the larger ones, are going to have a format already there. They're going to have a template or a format that they want to see whenever you have a textbook proposal. You should not deviate from that. Some of these places, again, big names like Cengage and McGraw-Hill, they're getting hundreds, if not thousands of proposals all the time. So if you just go in and shoot from the hip, and like, oh, well, this is kind of what I was thinking about, that's not going to get you anywhere, right? So if you're going to send in a prospectus, you got to make sure that you are using whatever format that they have, if they have one. Alternatively, I would say that if you go to conferences are also a good place to meet textbook reps. Now, most of the textbook reps who are there are textbook sellers, right? They're there to try to get you to adopt a textbook, but sometimes they have dual roles. They are both acquisition editors of new content, and they are also salespeople, or they might have a salesperson on the floor, but also have an acquisition editor around the conference as well. Often, if you go up to one of their booths, you can talk to them and set up an appointment, talk to the acquisitions editor, and get a sense of whether your idea is even worth pursuing before you do all the work to have a prospectus. But if you do end up getting to the point to where you write a prospectus, there are some things that I would say you would want to have in the event that they don't have a very strong template for you. The first one, as you might imagine, and the most obvious one, is just the book description. You need to tell the acquisition editor what the book is about. I would say you don't really want to go beyond a page, double-spaced, for this description. Second, you want to have the backgrounds of the authors. So if that's yourself and then whoever you might have as co-authors, I would say probably a paragraph on each one of these. What you're really trying to highlight here is that you have competence and expertise in the area that you're trying to write about. Because again, what you're trying to convince the acquisition editor is that whenever they publish a textbook and it has your name on it, people go, oh yeah, that person's an expert in that. I'd love to read their book, and not, why the heck is this person writing this book? They've never done that type of work before, right? So you definitely don't want the latter. You want to demonstrate that you have a good fit, because at the end of the day, that's going to help your sales. The next thing that you want to do is you want to have a market analysis of your book. This is probably the most important thing. I would say that you want to spend anywhere from a full page to maybe even 3 full pages of double-spaced writing about the market potential of your book. You want to identify what scholarship has been created that lays the foundation for the type of textbook that you want to have. You need to have an analysis of what other textbooks have already been published that are vying for the same market that you are wanting to target. And then you're going to have to show how your approach is going to be different from theirs and arguably better than theirs in order for you to establish the need for your book in the market. You'll want to talk about how large the market is. So for me, if I'm writing a book about public speaking, again, almost everyone in the United States takes a public speaking class if you go to a college or a university. But if I wanted to write a book about interpersonal communication, well, that's usually a second year level class, but not everyone has to take that. That might be an elective in some places. That might be a required major course. But now we've already truncated our market. Now it's no longer all students in the general education. Now it's electives or majors. So I've already started to reduce my target market. So you want to show how large your market is. There are also secondary markets that you might consider. Is your book going to be one that's good for libraries, nonprofits, high schools, homeschooling, anything, right? Any place that you can make a credible argument that your book might be adopted, you should write that that's the case and then show how that is true. Finally, in this section, you're going to have to address both your national and international markets and your online and print markets. So do you expect this book to be adopted abroad? For example, in my discipline, communication studies, that discipline is actually very US-centric. In most places around the world, you might have media studies or you might have linguistics or sociolinguistics, but there are very few communication studies programs as we practice it in the United States. So if I write a third-year student communication theory textbook, it's very, very unlikely that international scholars are going to adopt that. Whereas a first-year biology textbook, that's going to be something that anyone can adopt anywhere across the world. You also want to think about it in terms of online and print. Are there going to be options for that? Some publishing houses allow for ebooks, some don't. It's becoming more and more mainstream for there to be ebooks, especially from big publishing houses, primarily because then it really reduces or it even eliminates a used or secondhand market, which in turn means that there's more sales for the publishing house. But a lot of smaller publishers may not have an ebook version, and so that might be another consideration to think of. After your market analysis, you also want to think about the length of your textbook. How many chapters are you going to have? How long are those chapters going to be? And how long is this going to take you to write? I would say that whenever you send in a prospectus, some publishers will want to see, but even if they don't, you should have at least the first chapter written. That's a really good way of demonstrating that you kind of have quote unquote skin in the game, that you've already done some work on this. It also shows your writing style and demonstrates on some level like a getting stuff done factor, because I can tell you as an editor of a journal that academics are some of the worst people whenever it comes to meeting deadlines. And so just being able to have that from the outset can really impress a potential publishing house. So in that schedule, one of the things that you should also have is the table of contents. So this will be the names of your chapters. You might even have those chapters outlined in terms of the major section headings that you're going to have in each of those. Again, I would say the more detailed that you can be, the more impressive it is to a publisher. If you walk in there with a song and a prayer, hey, I've just had this idea. I've been kicking around for a few weeks or a few months or a few years. What do you think about it? Most publishers are going to turn you down if for no other reason that you seem very flaky. The more that you have done up front, the better it looks. The last thing that I would say that you are going to want to do is you're going to want to have a list of potential reviewers for your book. It's very important for you to have this list for two reasons. A, you want to have a robust set of reviews to come in. You want those reviews to give you feedback that is going to be formative and helpful as you go through this process. You want that feedback to come from content experts, but also, and secondly, you want those reviewers to be in programs that could be potential adopters. So after you get done writing parts of your book, your publishing house should be sending out 1 or 2 or 3 chapters to these reviewers for their reviews. Hopefully, though, they read and review and love your work so much they're like, I can't wait until this book comes out. I'd love to adopt it. Or at the very least, I can write something very, very nice about it that can go on the back of the book or maybe on Amazon or some other place where we can showcase that other experts of the field find that you have a quality book that you've written. So at this point, right, you've sent in your prospectus. Let's say that the publishing house has said, hey, we love this, get to work and have all this done within the next year. Great, huzzah. Good for you. Congratulations. First thing that you should do is go out and have a celebratory dinner or drink or whatever it is that you need to celebrate because, hey, you just got a book deal. Good for you. Good job. Congrats. But now it's time to get to work, right? So you're going to have to develop the different parts of your book. So that's the next step here. I would say that as you're writing your chapters, what you want to make sure that you're doing is being very regimented about how you set up each one of your chapters. And what I mean by that is that it should have a very strong organizational flow that carries through each one of those chapters. So for example, you might have a chapter that starts off with a story or with discussion questions or with learning objectives or any combination of those 3 or other things. But you want to think about what is it that I'm going to use in each one of my chapters to hook my reader. Then as you're writing through your textbook, you need to be keeping a list of your keywords because you're going to want to define those either in a box or at the back of the book. You might have breakout boxes or pictures or activities or other things sprinkled through your chapters. Again, you want to make sure that you have parallel structure across your chapters. Don't have one chapter that has a whole bunch of activities and then 3 chapters that don't, right? You want to make sure that you're doing the same type of writing technique across all of them. It's very important for you to have consistency. At the end of your chapter, again, you might have discussion questions, you might have an activity, references. Any of those things are important. But again, what's most important is that you're being consistent across all of them. Your publishing house should have instructional designers. They should have developmental editors. They should have people who, for them, this is certainly not their first or even their 101st rodeo whenever it comes to writing textbooks. They know what it is that they want to see. You should be relying on their expertise, following their advice, making sure that you're writing a book that fulfills both your scholarly vision and the needs of the market that you are trying to address. And quick sidebar, just recognize, especially if you're writing a textbook for undergraduate students, that your average undergraduate student is not reading. Their primary medium of entertainment, of information, of everything is the internet and social media. And so you need to write in a style that is going to be engaging for that type of person. So that will mean strong visuals, relevant examples, stories, video, or other types of ancillary materials. All of these things can help take your book from being a dusty tome that no one ever reads to being something that students actually engage with. I will say in terms of videos and pictures and other visuals that unless you're using materials that you yourself have photographed or recorded, that there's a very good chance that the media that you want to use is copyrighted. And if that's the case, that is either going to be impossible for you to use in your book or its use is going to require a licensing fee, which in turn will increase the cost of your book. So you might think to yourself, there's this really cool picture of Martin Luther King at the Washington Monument. Well, sorry to say that that's actually owned by the Associated Press. And so if you want to use that, you're going to have to pay for it. Some publishing houses have in-house visuals that you can use for free. There are also places that have public domain visuals that you can use. And again, if you make any of those visuals yourself, whether it's art, photographs, video recordings, whatever, you're free to use that for free. But a lot of the media that we readily think of whenever we want an example in our textbooks is usually copyrighted and thus will increase the price of your textbook. So now you've turned your book in. Congratulations. Huzzah. Now we're in the 5th step, which is working with your copy editor. So now you're going to be working with folks who are going to make sure that all of your work is up to date, that it's correct, that it's devoid of grammatical errors, that it's all typeset in the correct way, that everything looks good. You'll also be working, if you haven't already, with whoever does the cover art for your publishing house. It might be that they offer you some choices, or they might just pick it out for you. I will say it's very rare that you as the author will get to create your own cover art or have a lot of say about this. Usually you will be given a very small selection, and then you choose from those pre-selected examples. And then once you complete your copy edits and you've picked out your cover art and everything is good to go, now it's off to the printer and the intellectual side of this is done. Now it comes to the final step, which is making sure that you have adoptions and thinking about revisions. So how do textbooks actually get adopted? I would say 90% of adoptions happen because of word of mouth and because of social networks that you already have at your disposal. So once your book is nearing the stages of you turning it in, you should start to lay the groundwork with your colleagues at other institutions and at your home institution about the book that you are finishing. Put it on their radar that you would like for them to adopt it and that they might want to have a instructor copy or an exam copy or a preliminary copy so that way they can start to read it and make a decision on whether or not to do so. Recognize that as schedules for classes are being set further and further into the future, that those textbook decisions are also being made for further and further into the future. So if you finish your book in the spring, it's very unlikely that you're going to have a lot of adoptions in the fall. People have already made their adoptions. They're not going to try to change horses mid-race. They're not going to try to call their textbook store and change everything. They're not going to go through the rigmarole and bureaucracy of doing all those things. They're just going to let it ride, which means that your book that came out in the spring, at best case scenario, is going to get adopted for the next year's spring, or it might not even get adopted until the following year's fall. And so you have to be thinking to yourself, okay, how am I going to make sure to get as many adoptions as I can, as quickly as I can? Because it's very easy to fall in between the cracks of the regular academic semester schedule. So you have your friends, your colleagues, people who know you and trust you, right? You should be connecting with them and using them as a resource. The second way is just by general marketing. And again, this might come from your publisher if they have a robust marketing team like a McGraw-Hill or Cengage, or that might come primarily from you going to conferences, emailing people who are teaching courses that might use the type of book that you have written, and generally just being, at this point, an electronic door-to-door salesman for your textbook. And I know you might be thinking to yourself, oh man, I don't want to do that. I didn't become an academic so I could be a salesperson. Well, maybe not, but if you want to write a successful commercial textbook, that is in fact what you have to do. Because otherwise you're going to write a book, no one's going to read it, and you're never going to get to write another edition. So on that note, how do you get to write another edition? Well, the good news is that if you have a successful launch of your book, almost immediately your publishing house will let you know that, and they will tell you to start working on your next edition. That might be as soon as the first semester of adoptions. If that's the case, congratulations, that's awesome for you, but that means that from here on out, you need to think to yourself, in addition to any other writing project that I want to do, any articles, research, anything like that, I am probably always going to have to do revisions to this textbook. It will be an ongoing process for as long as this book continues to be successful. And I have friends and colleagues, they're on their 15th, 16th, 18th edition of their textbook. They're wildly successful, and they don't do a whole lot of research outside of that book. That's their scholarly contribution. They've done 18 editions of whatever textbook it is, and I'm sure that it's made them a lot of money as well. But you need to make sure that you have that on your dance card if your book ends up being very successful. If your book is less successful, you might still get a chance to do a revision. It might be year 2 or 3, though, before you've hit whatever quota your publishing house wants to see before they allow you to have a second edition. Some places have very strong quotas that they want to meet. They want to see you move so many units before they will allow you to write a next edition. Other places, as long as they think that there's consistent demand, they're fine to have fewer sales as long as those sales are consistent. It just depends on what kind of publishing house that you're working with. But again, you need to be thinking to yourself, whether it's successful, moderately successful, or not successful, how am I going to fit this into my ongoing scholarly trajectory? Because a book that you are not revising is a book that's dead. And it might be that it's dead because you wrote the book and no one ended up adopting it. But it also might be that the book was adopted, you just didn't keep up with it, and then the book died. And if we think these books do matter and that a successful book is one that's changing students' lives. And I would hope that you would keep working at it. Overall, what I would say is, again, one of the things that a lot of professors, especially in the humanities, are going to hate to hear, which is whenever you are writing a book, you are not writing a dissertation, you are not writing an article, you are not writing a monograph, you are not writing a scholarly contribution to your peers. You are writing a product that you hope that instructors adopt because it makes their life easier as it comes to teaching the content of the course. A good book is one that is providing the relevant ancillary materials, test banks and quizzes and course outlines, PowerPoints, and other types of materials that go along with a new textbook. You are writing to create a product that is going to be sold. And you are, in fact, not the primary beneficiary of that. The publishing houses are. But you can make some money doing this and at the same time do it in a way that allows students to actually learn something and maybe even fall in love with the discipline that you are trying to introduce them to. I will say, as I wrap up, one quick note is that some of you will at this point probably be screaming, well, what about OERs? What about open educational resources or open educational textbooks? Those things are awesome. I think there's a huge push for those things. I think a lot of the process that goes into creating those is the same process that goes into a commercial textbook. So you want to have a clear outline, a prospectus, reviewers, all those things. The biggest difference between them, obviously, is the price point. I think that unfortunately what that has ended up being is that a lot of people think that just because the textbook is free, that means that the textbook can be poorly written or not reviewed by other scholars because, well, it's free. So like if it's free, then like I don't really care if the quality is not up to par. And so I would really encourage you to reach out to your librarian and other folks that are working in these types of areas to secure support, whether that's university support, federal or state grant support, or other types of ways that you can get compensated for writing this stuff, because you should be compensated for your labor. Not to get on my soapbox too terribly here, but just because we as a society don't fund education properly, it should not be weaponized then and used as a reason to extract labor from you for free. So if you are getting paid or compensated to write an OER for students, great. But my personal opinion, you should not be writing those things for free to give to students for free. That devalues our labor. We are experts. Our work matters. And one of the ways that it indexes that it matters is that we make people pay for it. You value things that you have to pay for. If it's free, people don't care about it. And so maybe in a future episode, I'll talk a little bit more about OERs. But in this one, I really wanted to focus on the commercial side because a lot of folks, I think, are interested in this. And it's a way that you can have a really big effect on your field while at the same time doing it in a way that compensates you and ensures that you have longevity in your position because you're being adequately supported to demonstrate the type of expertise that has taken you years, if not decades, to acquire. So thank you all again. I appreciate you all listening. If you have other questions about textbook publishing, drop me a line. My contact information is in the podcast description. If you're interested in talking through an idea for a textbook, reach out to me. My calendar is open. The first 30 minutes of talking with me is always free. So if you just want to bounce around a couple of ideas, maybe brainstorm a couple of publishing houses that might be good fits or anything else, let me know, drop me a line, and I'll be happy to chat with you. Okay? So thank you so much, and I will see you in next week's episode. Hey, co-authors. What's stopping your best ideas from becoming your next big publication? Brilliant research shouldn't die in your drafts folder. Now's the time to bridge the gap between the possible and the published. You can support this podcast by subscribing to it, leaving a positive review, assigning it to your classes, or sharing it with a colleague. Let me know what I can do to make this the best podcast resource for you. And if you'd like to know more about my writing coach services, then you can find my information in the podcast description and set up an appointment. I'll be back next week with another episode. But until then, keep healthy, keep writing, and don't let reviewer 2 get you down.